Senator McPhedran on debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Honourable colleagues, having consulted with parliamentary colleagues, Indigenous leaders, and civil society, I rise today at third reading to propose amendments to Bill C-5. I will move some of these amendments on behalf of Senator Dawn Margaret Anderson, who is on parliamentary business in her home territory of the Northwest Territories. These amendments were developed in collaboration with Inuit Te Pirit Kanatami, ITK. You will recall that President Tan Obed expressed concerns to us in committee of the whole. Senator Anderson asked me to convey that she needs to ask for this amendment due to the poor track record of the Government of Canada in letters similar to that which we received from Minister LeBlanc. The constitutionality of this bill is in question, given its erosion of democratic principles, the predicted infringement on Indigenous rights, and risks it poses to Canadians and our shared, imperiled environment. While House of Commons amendments partially address some of these issues, most notably by enhancing transparency and limiting the use of the so-called Henry VIII powers in clauses 21 to 23 during periods of prorogation or dissolution, they fall short of ensuring the Act aligns with constitutional standards and democratic protections. Moreover, the House amendments introduce inconsistencies that could lead to misinterpretation or legal challenges. In haste to pass Bill C-5 before rising on June 20th, members of Parliament in the House of Commons who supported both parts of this bill effectively left the Senate to apply sober second thought to correct some critical flaws. The so-called Henry VIII powers in sections 21 to 23 are especially troubling, broad in scope, and constitutionally dubious. While the Supreme Court of Canada upheld similar power under the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, the GGPPA, those clauses merely allowed Cabinet to make regulations that could override provisions within that act. In her dissent, Justice Cote described even those powers as breathtaking and emphasized how unsettled the law remains, warning that such clauses risk undermining parliamentary sovereignty and limiting judicial review. Colleagues, what is more breathtaking is that the Conservatives and Liberals in the other place voluntarily gave up their parliamentary sovereignty to the Carney Cabinet to override statutes, such as the Fisheries Act and the Species at Risk Act. With no judicial guidance, with no parliamentary precedent, Conservatives have joined with Liberals to hand over their power to Cabinet on a scale and scope that far exceeds what was upheld in the GGPPA case. Looking at such a handover of parliamentary sovereignty, Professors Olszynski and Banks concluded that it is not only, quote, contrary to democratic principles and ideas of transparency and accountability, quote, it is constitutionally questionable. My proposed amendments resist giving up our parliamentary sovereignty by limiting the Governor and Council's regulatory authority to the enabling statute only, and by adding the Species at Risk Act to the list of exceptions in Section 21, Sub 2. Senator Anderson's amendments, developed in partnership with ITK, aim to strengthen transparency and clarity, particularly in Clause 4. They introduce clearer consultation requirements and address ITK's ongoing advocacy respecting the calls to justice of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Colleagues, before we proceed to the final vote, which I know is likely to pass, I wish to share several key observations from the Feminist Alliance for International Action regarding the implications of this unprecedented bill. In Canada today, women, Indigenous peoples, racialized communities, particularly racialized women, and persons with disabilities already face systemic economic marginalization. Bill C-5 will entrench these disparities. The government's definition of a strong economy, as reflected in this bill, advanced under Prime Minister Mark Carney and supported by Conservative MPs, prioritizes large-scale physical infrastructure projects with documented negative environmental impacts, industries that have historically provided limited access to women and equity-seeking groups, a discourse of speed and urgency that contrasts with decades of calls for inclusive economic measures from women's organizations, which have often gone unanswered. A narrow economic lens that overlooks the significant fiscal and social costs of gender-based violence. Broader and more inclusive definitions of economic development, ones that acknowledge both environmental sustainability and the lived realities of marginalized communities, are missing in Bill C-5, and this will influence what projects are funded and who benefits. As we watch the results of the C-5 juggernaut roll out and roll over Canada, please remember this key question. Are the constitutionally guaranteed rights to equality, to Aboriginal and treaty rights, the first to go with Bill C-5? In closing, I am asking your support for these amendments to seek to ensure that decision makers consider the gender-based violence impacts of major projects and their potential contribution to mitigation measures. These considerations, central to addressing MMIWG, are unlikely to be top of mind for project proponents or federal decision makers unless explicitly required. Therefore, honourable senators, I move that Bill C-5 be not now read a third time, but that it be amended. In Clause 4, on page 10, by replacing lines 30 to 37 with the following, quote, Council must consider the following factors. A, the extent to which the project can, 1, strengthen Canada's autonomy, resilience, and security. 2, provide economic or other benefits to Canada. 3, have a high likelihood of successful execution. 4, advance the interests of Indigenous peoples. 5, contribute to clean growth and to meeting Canada's objectives with respect to climate change. And 6, implement the recommendations outlined in the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and any other factors that the Governor in Council considers relevant. 2, on page 11, A, by deleting lines 1 and 2, B, by replacing line 28 with the following, quote, Gazette as soon as possible after it is made. If the order is made under subsection 1 or 4, the reasons must, among other things, demonstrate that the Governor in Council has considered the factors referred to in paragraphs 6 sub A. 3, on page 13, by replacing line 32 with the following, quote, with respect to each authorization that is specified in it and the reasons for imposing them. 4, on page 19, A, by replacing lines 3 and 4 with the following, quote, the name of a regulation or the reference to a portion of a regulation. B, by replacing lines 7 to 10 with the following, quote, Schedule 2 to add the name of any regulation made under any of the following acts of Parliament or a reference to a portion of any of those regulations. C, by replacing lines 28 and 29 with the following. O, the Explosives Act. P, the Hazardous Products Act. And Q, the Species at Risk Act. 5, on page 20, by replacing lines 7 and 8 with the following, quote, from the application of any provision of regulations made under that, end of quote. B, in the schedule, on page 22, 1, by deleting item 10 of part 1 of schedule 2. 2, by renumbering items 11 and 12 as items 10 and 11, and by making any necessary consequential changes to the numbering of cross-references to these items. Senator Anderson and I thank you for your consideration. Merci, miigwech.
In amendment, it was moved by the Honourable Senator McPhedran, seconded by the Honourable Senator Karatak-Lindell, that Bill C-5 be not read the third time, but that it be amended. A. Dispense suffit.